Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I stepped into the Union Hall, immediately feeling out of place. The heavy red uniforms and polished brass of the firefighters made me want to shrink into the walls. This wasn't my world anymore. Once, sure, I'd been a city paramedic, following my father's footsteps, trying to be part of the tradition. But tonight, I wasn't anything more than the kid who hadn't made it. Dad's retirement party was supposed to be about him. The room was full of old colleagues and their families. As I made my way toward the back, I saw my father, Chief Ron Kerr, standing at the front. He raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, "to a career well spent, and to those who followed." The crowd clapped, and I forced a smile. His eyes found me, briefly, and he gestured toward me. "This is my daughter, Miranda. She tried the job, couldn't finish. Found other things to do." The room chuckled, and I froze. The awkwardness stung, a slap I'd learned to ignore by now. But tonight it felt different. I was already distant from this world, but he just pushed me farther away with that line. Lila, my younger sister, stepped in to smooth things over. "Don't mind him," she said brightly, her voice carrying more than it should have. "He's proud of all of us." She shot me a look before taking her place at the table, right next to Dad, and the seat beside her, where I always used to sit, was conspicuously empty. "Thanks," I said, keeping my voice even. "Congratulations, Dad." He gave me a short nod, the kind you give a stranger, and turned away. I didn't wait for any more. I found a seat near the coat room, tucked out of view, and let the muted chatter of the party fade around me. The slideshow on the projector kicked in. Old photos of firehouse events and family barbecues flashed on the screen. There was one of me in my early EMT uniform smiling in front of an ambulance. I didn't recognize that version of me anymore. Then the projector sputtered, and the screen flickered to something else. Live footage. Breaking news. A hostage situation. The downtown county courthouse. The camera focused on a woman in black tactical gear, moving swiftly, coordinating evacuations. There was chaos, but she moved with a cool intensity. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch, I saw the unmistakable angle of her face. Me. I stood still, my body refusing to move as I watched the footage unfold on the big screen. The woman was me, former EMT, now a private security consultant for a crisis intervention team. The camera captured me, neutralizing a gunman, signaling for civilians to evacuate. A small detail on the ticker confirmed my identity. Miranda Kerr, private contractor, former EMT. The room went dead silent. I didn't glance at anyone. I couldn't. But I could feel their eyes on me, each one trying to process the unfamiliar woman on the screen, the one they'd written off as a failure. Then, I heard a crash. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. I didn't move. Didn't need to. The silence in the room grew thicker, a weight pressing down on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, I heard someone clear their throat. I just kept watching, letting the minutes stretch between us. The new version of me, the one who wasn't there to prove anything, just there to do the job, was playing out in front of everyone. It was uncomfortable, but I didn't feel the need to fill the air with explanations. I let them have their moment of realization. Let them figure it out. The projector flickered again, and I shifted in my seat, feeling the tension knotting in my stomach. Something was wrong. The images on the screen jumped and distorted. A technical glitch. Those happened at fancy events like this. But the crowd was quiet now, a hush moving through the room like the first crack of thunder before a storm. And then it cut to live footage. A news anchor's voice was cut off as the camera zoomed in, showing the chaos unfolding at the downtown county courthouse. It was like watching a scene from some action movie, only I was there. The woman in tactical black gear moved quickly through the courthouse, leading civilians toward the exits. The footage was shaky, raw, taken from a dozen different angles. There was no question, it was real. The woman in the front, calm under pressure, orchestrating the entire thing, was me. I didn't blink. I couldn't. I watched myself neutralize a gunman, not flinching as I moved in close, grabbed his weapon, and pinned him to the ground. The camera cut to a wider angle showing me talking through a comm system, directing people into a safer corridor, guiding them to the exit. The ticker at the bottom of the screen confirmed my name. Miranda Kerr, private security consultant, former EMT, currently working with a state crisis intervention contractor. There it was. My name, my face, my past, all rolled into one. The air in the room thickened. I felt a shift, a collective tension rising as everyone pieced together who I was. And then I heard it, my father's glass slipping from his hand, the sound sharp in the silence. It shattered. 100 pieces of glass scattered across the floor, but I didn't move, didn't even look at him. I stayed seated, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen, the image of myself flashing in front of me. The woman they all thought had nothing to offer was doing her job, efficiently, professionally, without a moment of hesitation. But now, it wasn't just about doing the work. It was about how I was being seen, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of the crowd, the whispers running through the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, trying to make sense of it. Is that Miranda?" Someone asked, their voice low but audible. I didn't respond. Another voice cut in, quieter but more judgmental. Wasn't she just in the department for a while? What's she doing in private security?" A few chuckles followed, light and awkward, trying to mask the discomfort. But it didn't change what they were all thinking. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not with them. Through the corner of my eye, I saw my father's face, his expression slack and unreadable, as he stood frozen, staring at the screen. His hand was still outstretched where the glass had been, the broken shards scattered at his feet. He didn't even move to clean it up, not until one of his colleagues muttered something, and he snapped to attention. But it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a regret. It was just him, in the presence of something that didn't fit into the narrative he'd built around me. I could feel Lila's eyes on me now, her sharp gaze slicing through the air. She didn't like being blindsided. I knew her well enough to feel her discomfort rising from the other side of the room. She'd always backed Dad's view of me, no matter how many times I'd come through in the field, saved lives, made a difference. She still held the old story that I hadn't finished what I started. The room shifted, just barely, but the subtle movements were there. People exchanging glances, some uncomfortable, some curious, others skeptical. I didn't care about the whispers. I didn't care about their discomfort. I just wanted to let the moment unfold. Let them digest it however they needed to. My name was on that screen. My reputation, finally, was outside of their hands. And for once, it wasn't a joke or a half-hearted explanation. I was real now. And they were seeing it. The whispers around the room faded into the background as the image of me on the screen stayed frozen, but the memories didn't. The way Dad used to look at me when I was 10, that proud smile of his whenever I wore my little junior EMT jacket. I remembered riding along with him on firehouse tours, watching the way he moved through the space, confident, decisive, like he owned the place. It wasn't just the uniform. It was the aura he carried, the weight of a lifetime in service. I trailed behind him, trying to keep up with his long strides, watching him work, taking in every detail. He'd stop every now and then, teaching me something. How to check a pulse, how to wrap gauze, how to stay calm when everything around you was chaos. "You'll be good at this," he'd say, his hand resting on my shoulder, his voice full of certainty. I wanted that. Wanted to be just like him. One day when I was about 10, I said it out loud. "I want to help people like you, Dad. I want to do the job." He'd smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "I think you will." I carried that dream with me, into paramedic school, through late-night ambulance shifts, and finally to trauma response training. I never doubted it for a second. I wanted to be a part of that world, the one where you made a difference when it counted, the one where lives were on the line, and you either rose to the occasion or you didn't. But somewhere along the way, the dream became a weight, an expectation. It happened on a rainy day in the field, when I tried to push through the pain in my hip, ignoring the sharp flare as we loaded up a patient. I felt it snap before I even knew what had happened. A line-of-duty injury that left me unable to pass my physicals. The tests? The one thing my father had always drilled into me. "You can't do the job if you can't keep up," he'd said, his voice colder than it ever had been before. It wasn't the first time I'd felt the distance grow between us, but it was the moment I knew something had shifted. Dad never fully recovered from that. The disappointment in his eyes was all I could see. I wasn't cut out for the job anymore, not in his world. After I left the department, I kept going, kept pushing. I didn't quit. I found another way in. Private evac teams, high-risk rescues. The work didn't stop. But that didn't matter to Dad. He saw it as a failure, not an adaptation. When I got an award for saving a busload of kids during a storm while working for a private evac team, He wasn't there. Didn't even show up for the ceremony, not even a card. It hurt, sure, but what hurt more was Lila. She always backed him, always reinforced his version of things. "Miranda's not built for this," she'd say when people asked why I didn't stay in the department. "She couldn't handle it, and now she's moved on." The words stung, but what stung more was the way she said it, like it was the truth, like she'd already written me off as someone who tried but didn't have what it took. She never saw the work I did. She didn't understand it. And maybe that was fine. Maybe that was just how it had to be. But every time she spoke about me in front of their friends, every time she defended Dad's silence with a practiced smile, it felt like another layer of distance, another push further away from who I was, from what I was capable of. I wasn't quitting. I wasn't failing. I was just choosing a different path. But it wasn't a path they ever saw, not until tonight. I sat in the back of the room, surrounded by the faint hum of laughter and the clink of silverware against plates. It was a holiday dinner, the kind where the house smelled of roasting meat and my father's latest retirement speech was already in full swing. But that night, something in me was different. Maybe I was just tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Dad had asked me to join them for the meal after a week-long off-book rescue mission during a regional flood. I'd been on the ground with my team, helping evacuate people who had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of work that earned medals or ribbons, but it was real. And it mattered. At least it mattered to the people I helped, but not to him. We were sitting around the table, Lila already with her usual smugness, sitting next to Dad. I hadn't even been offered a seat at that end. It was like I wasn't even part of the family anymore. I was there, but I wasn't. The conversation shifted, and I heard Dad's voice rise. "Miranda's been out there trying to make a name for herself, but he paused, holding his wine glass like it was some kind of weapon. "She didn't finish what she started." Lila, of course, smirked. It was almost like she was waiting for it, waiting for him to break me down again. "Yeah, well, it's just like Dad said. Some people don't stick with things." The sting of her words cut deep, even though I'd heard them before. The whole dinner felt like another round of their performance, with me as the punchline. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. What would be the point? Their rejection wasn't about me, not really. It wasn't about who I was or what I could do. It was about something else, something I couldn't change, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't my work that they rejected, it was the way I did it. The fact that I didn't wear a badge or a uniform that fit into their neat little world. That's when it hit me. The difference wasn't in my work, it was in my rank. The uniform I wore didn't carry the weight it should have. Dad could never get past the idea that without the firehouse seal, I wasn't legitimate. Without the title, I wasn't enough. To him, it didn't matter if I'd risk my life for someone on the other side of the world or the guy standing next to me. He saw the work, but not the person doing it. Lila always made sure to reinforce that. When we were growing up, she'd corner me and quietly remind me that I wasn't in the family business, that I wasn't in the same league. And whenever I tried to step back into the fold, she would subtly push me out. At dinners like this, she always made sure to sit me at the farthest edge of the table, away from the important conversations. And whenever Dad's old friends came around, she'd introduce me with that same dismissive tone, like I wasn't even worth the effort to explain. "This is Miranda," she'd say, her smile barely flickering. "She's doing something different now." I couldn't even look them in the eyes. I just wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. The worst part? I realized Lila didn't just follow Dad's example. She took it one step further. She wasn't just protecting Dad's pride. She was rewriting my story in front of everyone, ensuring I'd always be the outsider. It was subtle, but it was there. And it made me wonder if this was how it would always be, constantly fighting for visibility in a world that couldn't or wouldn't see me for what I was. It wasn't just about the lack of a uniform, it was the fact that I wasn't part of the right circles, the right family, the right rank. The thing they couldn't understand was that the real work, the real heart of it, didn't come with a badge. It came with the choice to show up, to step into the chaos and do what you had to, no matter the cost. But to them, it was just a different path, one that didn't deserve a seat at their table. The gala's silence still clung to me, the weight of Dad's words and the room's shifting perceptions, but I didn't have time to think about that now. The call came through as I was walking out of the union hall, still processing the chaos of seeing myself on that screen. It was the agency. A high-priority escort mission, a witness for a sensitive case, needing to get into the courthouse quietly and without notice. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even pause to consider how it felt to be slipping back into my other life, the one they didn't see. I grabbed my gear, checked my weapon, and headed out. No time to dwell on the shit show that was my family tonight. This was the job. The courthouse was a fortress of marble and glass, the kind of place where you didn't want to make noise unless you absolutely had to. I met the witness in the rear parking lot, just as the sun started to dip behind the city skyline. He was jittery, nervous, eyes darting around, but I kept my pace steady, my tone calm. "Stay close," I told him. "We're going in through the side entrance." We moved quickly but quietly. The plan was simple: get him to the back chambers, keep him out of the public eye, and make sure we were out of there before anyone noticed. But the tension in my gut, the one that had been there since the gala, wouldn't let go. Something about the quiet, the cold concrete walls felt off. I heard it before I saw it, the faint sound of gunfire, sharp, quick, coming from somewhere above us. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Stay here," I told the witness, my voice a low command. I turned, already signaling my team through the comms. "We've got an active shooter, third floor, secured records area. I'm moving to containment." The witness didn't argue. He pressed himself against the wall, staying out of sight, but I didn't wait to check on him. My attention was on the immediate threat now. I sprinted through the back halls of the courthouse, moving quickly, my boots echoing off the polished floors as I cut a path toward the nearest stairwell. The comms were live now, my team coordinating positions, covering all possible exits. I took a sharp right, bypassing the elevators, heading straight for the stairwell. But as I moved through the narrow hallways, something felt off. The quiet wasn't right. It wasn't the usual calm you get in a tense situation. It was too still, too quiet. I pushed through the back stairwell door and froze. There were civilians, dozens of them, pressed against the walls near the courtroom hallway, huddled together, eyes wide with fear. They weren't making a sound, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't just scared of a robbery, they were scared of something far worse. I spoke into the comms again, voice tight. "We've got civilians in the hall. I'm pulling them to the service stairwell. Watch your six." I shifted my focus. The plan had shifted from containment to rescue. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't some random threat. I could feel it. The situation was escalating, and fast. I glanced over the balcony railing, watching the chaos unfolding below. I could see shadows moving, the figures of the assailants as they moved through the halls. They were precise, calm, and well-coordinated. Too well-coordinated to be amateur robbers. Then it clicked. This wasn't about a quick cash grab. It wasn't about money or records. This was an attempt to kidnap someone, a public official, someone high-profile who could be a target for leverage. I didn't know exactly who yet, but I could see it in the way the shooters moved, clearing the hallways, securing exits, and sweeping rooms. This wasn't their first time doing this. My job had just changed. I moved quickly, slipping into the shadows and signaling for the civilians to follow me. I kept my movement sharp, calculated. Every step felt heavier than the last as I shifted my focus from the threat to getting these people out of harm's way. I didn't know who was behind this, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them take anyone else today. I moved quickly, pulling the civilians into the service stairwell, keeping them low, keeping them quiet. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into the situation, but there was no time to hesitate. I had to move fast, keep them moving, keep them out of the way. They were scared, their eyes wide, but they trusted me enough to follow. That was something. I led them through the narrow hall, away from the sound of gunfire echoing off the marble walls. There were more of them now, at least a dozen civilians huddled close behind me, their breaths shaky. I kept my voice steady, low. "Stay with me. Don't stop. Keep your heads down." I reached a corner and froze. One of the assailants was there, standing in front of a door leading to another hallway. I had to make a choice: engage him and risk everything, or pull back and keep the civilians safe. I chose to engage. I stepped out from the corner, moving slowly, deliberately. The guy didn't see me coming until I was right on him. His eyes widened, and his hand went to his gun. But I was faster. I slapped his wrist hard, sending the weapon flying, and shoved him into the wall. "Not a word," I said, my voice sharp, cold. "You're not going to shoot anyone today." He looked at me, his face pale under the mask. He reached for another weapon. Stupid move. I disarmed him in one quick motion, then pinned him down, my knee pressing into his chest. "Don't make this worse for yourself," I warned him. "You'll get out of here alive if you don't make me do something you'll regret." His eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but he was trapped. I could see the fear in his eyes. That was all I needed. I yanked his arms behind him, cuffed him, and left him there. The rest of the civilians were still waiting, just beyond the corner. "Move," I called, waving them forward. "Keep it quiet. Stay together." I ushered them along, and my team confirmed positions through the comms. We had the building contained, sort of, but I couldn't stop. There was still a bigger mission to finish. As I reached the stairwell, one of the civilians screamed. A second assailant had come from nowhere, charging at me with a knife raised. I didn't hesitate. I stepped into his charge, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The knife hit the floor and we went down hard. The struggle was brutal, fast. He was strong, but I was faster, smarter. I rolled him over and pinned his arm behind his back, snapping a cuff around his wrist before he could get a second breath. "Stay down," I told him. "I'm not interested in killing you." The civilians were still moving, still with me. They didn't need to see the rest of it. They didn't need to see this kind of violence up close. They'd been through enough. I took a breath, checked the comms again. One of my team members mentioned a high-priority official stuck in the far corner of the building. Someone I knew, someone important. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. A retired judge, Judge Allen. He used to be a close family friend. I hesitated for a split second, just a second, but then I moved. I made my way through the halls, the tension winding tight in my chest. I didn't care what kind of trouble I'd get into for this. I didn't care if I was breaking protocol. There was no protocol for saving people you knew, people who had once sat at your family's table. I reached the hallway and saw him, just as I'd feared. The judge, backed into a corner, his clerk beside him, both of them surrounded by another shooter. The assailant didn't see me coming, not until I threw a flashbang into the room. The explosion of light and sound threw him off balance, just enough for me to close the distance and disarm him in a flash. The judge didn't flinch as I grabbed him by the arm and pulled him toward the service exit. "Miranda," he said, his voice hoarse. "I can't believe it's you." I didn't answer. I just kept moving, pushing him forward, but I could feel his eyes on me. "You're not still doing this?" he asked, disbelief in his tone. "Your father wouldn't believe it. He wouldn't believe any of this." I didn't look back. I didn't even want to respond. "He'll find out his way," I said, my voice low, steady. We reached the exit, and I pushed him into the safety of the hallway. I kept my eyes on the back of the building, waiting for the rest of the team to confirm it was clear. There was no room for hesitation anymore. I was done looking back. Done asking for permission? I'd saved him. And I wasn't done yet. I stood backstage, just beyond the curtain, listening to the murmurs that rippled through the room. The buzz was like static, a background hum of disbelief, confusion, and curiosity. My father's words, those sharp, dismissive ones about me not finishing what I started, echoed in the back of my mind, but they were fading. His voice wasn't what mattered now. What mattered was what was happening out there. "Is that really her?" someone whispered. "She left the department years ago. What's she doing in civilian contracting?" The word civilian sounded like a slur, tossed around like it meant something less. The room was divided. Some of the older firefighters, the ones who'd worked with Dad, seemed uncomfortable. But there were others, younger, maybe more open-minded, who were asking questions. One of them, a young guy in a Navy suit, spoke up. "She was on the news. She did the job. Maybe not in a uniform, but it looks like she saved lives." I could hear someone else scoff. "It's not the same. She's not in the department. It's not real service. She's just a contractor." Just a contractor. The words stung more than I expected. I'd been doing real work, life and death situations, but it still wasn't enough for some people. I clenched my fist behind my back, pressing the nail of my thumb into my palm. They didn't see me, not like this. And then I heard the voice that cut through it all. "Enough," said Chief Holbrook, his voice booming, calm but firm. I stepped back from the curtain, just out of sight, but close enough to hear every word. Holbrook wasn't just any old division chief. He was a friend of the family, my father's mentor, someone I had looked up to for years. If anyone could challenge this crowd, it was him. I waited, barely breathing, as his words carried. "Miranda's operation today was exemplary," he said, silencing the room with authority. "I know some of you might think it's easy to sit behind a desk, to wear a shiny badge, and think that's the only way to serve. But I'll tell you this, Miranda showed more courage today than many who've stayed in the uniform." There was a long pause, the room holding its breath. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. "Service," Holbrook continued, "isn't about the uniform. It's about the work. It's about showing up when it counts. And Miranda, whether you like it or not, she's been showing up. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but I did. He was defending me, putting my work up against the same legacy Dad had built and others had followed. His words were like a shield I hadn't realized I needed. But the murmurs didn't stop. The room was split. Some of the older officers shuffled uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded, but there was still a resistance in the air. Lila stood across the room, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For the first time all night, she didn't look smug. She didn't look anything, just still. Her posture had changed. She wasn't engaging in the chatter. Holbrook's words had peeled back a layer of something deeper, and I could see the subtle shift. Lila wasn't backing Dad up like she always did. She wasn't reinforcing the idea that I didn't belong. But she wasn't defending me either, not directly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I wasn't sure what yet, but it was something. I kept listening as Holbrook moved on to explain how far-reaching the idea of service really was. How those who wore uniforms didn't always have the monopoly on heroism. He talked about my work, how I'd been on the ground, saving lives, making tough calls in the middle of disasters, without fanfare, without recognition. The others didn't know that side of me. None of them had seen it. But Holbrook, he knew. By the time he finished, there was a quiet that hung in the room, a silence that didn't feel like rejection. It felt like something else, something I wasn't sure I had the courage to name. I stayed in the shadows, listening as the conversation began to shift. The room was still divided, but now it wasn't just about me. It was about something bigger. The difference between the uniform and the work, between the people who stayed and the ones who walked away to find a different way to serve. My place was still uncertain, but I could feel the room reconsidering who I was. The whole room, rethinking the narrative they'd built around me, their old assumptions crumbling one word at a time. And for the first time, I felt like I was no longer a stranger in that world. The gala had finally wound down, the last of the guests drifting out into the cool night air, and I slipped away from the noise, ducking into a quiet hallway. I needed space, needed to breathe, but I didn't expect him to find me. Dad's footsteps echoed before I saw him. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. It had been years since I'd let myself really feel the weight of his disappointment. Years since I'd let him get to me. But tonight, after everything, I was tired of pretending it didn't matter. "You're not hard to find," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. I didn't say anything, just waited. He stopped beside me. I could feel the tension in his frame. "I didn't know, Miranda." The words hit like a fist. I still didn't look at him. I could hear the shift in his voice, the admission that he hadn't been asking the right questions, that he hadn't been paying attention. "I judged you," he said. "Assumed you left because you couldn't handle it. I didn't think to ask why, and I should have. I should have known better." I swallowed. His words weren't an apology. They were just a truth he couldn't avoid anymore. "Dad," I started, but I had to pause, collect myself. It wasn't about that. I didn't leave because I couldn't handle the work. I left because of an injury, one that took me out of the field, out of the department. I couldn't pass the physicals anymore, but I didn't stop working. I kept going. I did high-risk evacuations. I ran covert missions. I've been part of rescue teams that worked in places you'll never hear about. I could feel him stiffen, could hear his breath catch in his chest. He didn't say anything at first, like he was trying to absorb what I was saying, but I could see the confusion in his face, the way he was piecing it together. "All this time," I said, the frustration creeping in, "you never asked, never cared enough to ask what I was doing." He didn't look away from me, but I could see the weight of what I'd said sinking in. His face tightened, his mouth pressing into a thin line. "I didn't think I needed to," he finally muttered, almost to himself. I thought you just quit." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't quit, Dad. I found another way. A better way." The silence stretched between us. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but then stopped, his gaze drifting to the floor. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, probably replaying everything in his head, wondering how he'd missed it all. "I didn't know," he said, the words raw now. "I should have asked. I should have seen it." I nodded, feeling something shift in the air between us. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an apology I'd been waiting for. It was understanding. For the first time, it felt like he wasn't seeing me through the lens of the girl who didn't finish what she started, the one who couldn't live up to his expectations. I waited a moment before speaking again. "I don't need you to apologize, Dad. I just need you to see who I really am. That's all." He was quiet, still processing. His eyes were locked on me now, no longer filled with judgment or disappointment, just something new, something I hadn't seen in him before. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. "That's my daughter." The words landed between us, not as an apology, but as an acknowledgement, a recognition. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting for his approval anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into the role he had carved out for me. I wasn't asking for anything except to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally been seen. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. But in that moment, something that had been broken between us started to repair, not with grand gestures, but with quiet clarity. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about knowing where we stood now, knowing, at last, that I was enough. It's funny how quickly things can change without you even realizing it. A few weeks after the gala, the first real sign that things were shifting came in the form of a letter. It was from the governor's office, tucked into an envelope with the kind of official seal that made my hands feel unsteady when I saw it. Inside, a handwritten note from the State Emergency Operations Commander, inviting me to consult full-time with their team. The recognition was humbling, unexpected to say the least. It wasn't just about the work I'd done in the field. It was about seeing that someone, somewhere, finally understood the value of what I brought to the table. I put the letter on the counter, then stared at it for a while, my finger tracing the edges of the paper. A career in the public sector, permanent, stable, respectable, the kind of job my father would have been proud to see me in. I didn't immediately respond, though. I wasn't sure I was ready to take that step. Not yet. It wasn't long after that when I found myself at another family event. It was a smaller gathering this time, Dad's old friends, Lila, and some colleagues. I walked in, the same sense of being an outsider still lingering like it always did. But this time, the tension felt different. It was quieter, subtler. Dad was already in the middle of conversation when he spotted me. "Miranda," he said, calling me over. His voice carried with a kind of ease I hadn't heard in a while. He was standing next to Trina, his old colleague from the fire department. She was a tall woman, sharp-eyed, and always just a little too polished. I could tell she was trying to gauge the mood of the room before speaking. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Dad. "This is Trina," Dad said, motioning to her. "She was with me in the department for years." I nodded at Trina, and she gave a stiff smile, but there was no underlying coldness like I'd gotten used to before. I could feel something different in her posture, less guarded, less dismissive. It was like she wasn't trying to undermine me anymore. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cold either. Neutral, maybe. "And this," Dad continued, turning to me, "is my daughter, Miranda. The one who kept people alive when the rest of us were talking." There it was, the first time I'd ever heard him say something like that, publicly, and I wasn't sure what I felt about it. He wasn't bragging, he wasn't even smiling. It was matter of fact, but it was real. He didn't have to say anything more. He didn't need to. The words hung there between us, and I could feel the subtle shift. Trina didn't say anything for a moment. I caught her glance at Dad, then at me. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then just nodded. She didn't argue or make a pointed comment about my civilian status or anything else. The moment was awkward, but it wasn't hostile. She stepped back a little, giving me space, and the conversation continued, leaving me standing there in the strange silence. Lila, off to the side, was unusually quiet. For once, she didn't say anything to undermine me, didn't throw out some passive-aggressive comment about my career choices. She just stood there, arms loosely crossed, her gaze softening for a moment before shifting back to the room. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe she was starting to see it too. I didn't feel triumphant in the way I thought I would. I didn't feel vindicated or even proud. It wasn't about that anymore. I wasn't standing there trying to prove something. I wasn't waiting for applause or recognition. What I felt wasn't victory. It was just peace. The old motifs, the ones I'd carried with me for so long, were gone. No more feeling like I didn't belong. No more wondering if I was enough. The flashes of the courthouse operation came to me, the kid clutching my sleeve as I guided him through the hallways, the judge nodding at me, understanding. That was where I had found my place. I had made it. There was always a place for me. I just had to make it myself. I didn't need to chase validation anymore. I didn't need to seek approval from the people who'd kept me at arm's length. The work, the results, those spoke for themselves. And now, slowly, the rest of the world was starting to hear it. I looked at my father, standing there with Trina, and felt a small knot loosen inside me. Things weren't perfect, but they were different. For once, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to him, or to anyone else. It was enough. A few days later, another envelope landed on my doorstep. I recognized the seal immediately. It was from my former command. My heart skipped for a second, but I didn't rush to open it. Instead, I set it on the counter next to the stack of papers I'd been ignoring all week. The letter wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. When I finally opened it, the words inside were familiar. An invitation to return as an advisor. They wanted me back. They needed me. I felt a strange pull. Old habits, old comforts. But I didn't feel the same urgency to say yes. There was a time when I'd have jumped at this kind of opportunity, desperate for the recognition, the validation that I was enough. But now, I knew better. I knew my value wasn't tied to their approval or a title that fit neatly into their world. It was tied to the work, to what I'd already done, and to what I could continue doing, whether or not anyone ever called me official again. I put the letter down and looked around the quiet apartment. I thought about everything that had shifted. The way my father had finally seen me, the way Trina's quiet respect felt different, the way Lila had stopped offering her backhanded compliments. It wasn't about the applause anymore. It was about the quiet moments, the work I did, the lives I saved, the places I'd carved out for myself. The past few weeks had shown me that. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of me. The steam curled up from the cup, filling the room with a calm that I hadn't known I needed. Then Dad walked in, his presence steady and quiet as always. He didn't say anything at first, just poured his own cup of tea before sitting down across from me. It wasn't the same as before. He wasn't trying to fill the silence with questions or assumptions. He just sat there with me, sharing the moment without forcing anything. He poured my tea first. Small, quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. We didn't need words, not anymore. The warmth of the tea spread through me as I leaned back, letting the moment settle. There was no rush to fix anything anymore, no sense of needing to explain. Some repairs take time, slow and quiet like the steady drip of a faucet. You don't always see them happen, but eventually, the room is full of the sound of water. I didn't need to shout my story anymore. It lived on its own. It had always lived on its own. And now, I knew that no matter where I went, no matter what I didn't need anyone's permission to exist in it. Dad sat across from me, sipping his tea, and for once, we didn't need to say anything to know we were both okay.